Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, real conversations with actionable insights into what consumers want and why. My name is Andrew McDougall, and I'm Director of Beauty and Personal Care Research at Mintel. And I'm excited to bring you our latest installment, chatting with more of our lovely experts. And today I am joined with I'm very biased, but with the loveliest of experts, my friends and colleagues today, to talk specifically about everything beauty and personal care and to talk about our 2025 trends. So I'm delighted today to be joined on the platform by my friend and colleague, Clotilde Drape. She works in the beauty and personal care research team alongside myself and was instrumental in putting these trends together. So welcome, Clotilde.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
And I'm also joined as well today by two of my esteemed colleagues in the custom consulting business that we have at Mintel. But you may also, for those of you that are followers of Mintel Beauty and Personal Care, you will probably recognize these voices as well. They have been working in and around beauty and personal care for so long. So what they don't know isn't worth knowing, really. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Vivienne Rudd. So welcome, Vivienne.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone.
And I'm also delighted to be joined by Alex Fisher as well. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Hi.
I feel like I speak to you all the time, so I feel like this isn't like the introductions are a little bit weird in this sense. But I'm delighted to have you on the call today, as I say, because we are going to go through our 2025 beauty and personal care trends. We do have three of them that you may see on the platform if you want any more details. So the three trends that we'll kind of go through today, the first is called My Knowledge is Power, which is all about empowered consumers, how they expect transparency, authenticity, alignment with their personal values. They want personalized products now that are becoming more available to them, and they really want to take control as well. It's about how brands and companies can help offer guidance and education to that kind of informed consumer. The second trend that we'll go through today is Turning the Tide, which is very much looking at how we should be reframing sustainability now. It is this baseline expectation. We know that it's never going to be the number one driver for consumers buying products in beauty and personal care. They won't compromise on product efficacy, so those are the most important things. However, if you're not being sustainable, it is one of the main reasons to not buy your product. So it is such an important thing that brands are already taking into account, but there is still a lot more that we can see coming through with this trend. And the last trend is Think Slow, Move Fast, which is really looking at sort of the slow living concept and this slow beauty movement, kind of emphasizing minimalism and simple, effective solutions. It's all about sort of value justification, I think, for a lot of consumers, this idea again that we're buying with intent or with purpose. We want products that make us feel good. How products make us feel is so important. We live in, or we work in such a great industry, I think, for how the products we make actually make people feel. So this trend is very much looking at that sort of mindfulness aspect, but in a number of different ways. But I am now, I've done my bit introducing the trends there. I am now going to bring you guys into this. And I think the first thing I want to do really is going back to one of those first things I said around sort of taking control. Is that something that you are seeing from consumers right now? Is it something you're having conversations with brands about how consumers want to be more empowered? I always feel like it goes both ways, because in one aspect we say consumers are really well informed, but at the same time there's still so much that we can help them with. I don't know who wants to bite the bullet and come in on that first. Clotilde, I may go to you first on this one. But how do you feel that element of taking control is important?
Yeah, I think there's been a big shift, I would say, over the past years, especially with probably younger consumers who have been quite heavily influenced by what they're seeing on social media. So I think we have to be careful also when we say informed consumers. I think we have more exposed and aware consumers to a wide array of information, but then it's also hard to make sure that you kind of are able to filter between the good and the bad. But it also shows a lot of willingness to experiment, I would say, from a consumer standpoint. And I think it's challenging how consumers are interacting with brands now. I think consumers have more control than brands do in the beauty space at the moment. And it's quite difficult for brands to kind of create more loyalty also from consumers from that perspective. And I think for brands, it will be important to position themselves as educators, trying to help consumers make sense also of everything that's out there, basically.
Looking at the way that brands are targeting different consumer demographics with giving varying levels of control is also interesting. It makes me think of Indu, for example, which has got this community of Gen A's and young Gen Zs that it's actively consulting with for its product formulations as well as its marketing. And that's the ultimate control, really, actually sort of having a say in the products that you're going to be buying at online or at counter.
I think that Indu example is really interesting because a lot of our clients are asking us about, and I think this happens every single generation because you've got your new point of entry, right? And you had your millennials. It was all about millennials. Then it became about Gen Z. Now it's about Gen Alpha. So we're getting asked a lot more recently about Gen Alpha and what they want. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, they're still teenagers. They don't know what they want. So when you see things like Indu, what I found really interesting was looking at that. It's still got the playfulness of those kind of brands that you had when you were a teenager, and just like fun, funky colors, etc. But also with that kind of, as you were saying, Clotilde, kind of they're influenced quite a lot, right? So a lot of the branding is then also quite adult in terms of like the naming conventions, the ingredients that they hype up, and it feels like this weird kind of hybrid between what you want at your life stage and what you've been exposed to. So I think very much agree with the idea that it's about that education and kind of taking that from awareness and helping them make sense of it rather than necessarily giving them ultimate control over what goes into products, because we think we know what we want, but do we definitely know what we want? I think we need somebody to guide us.
Well, it's a good point, actually, because we already see examples of that, don't we? Where, like, for example, there's this whole sort of teen tween sort of buying products that contain ingredients that they don't necessarily need. I mean, if you haven't hit puberty, you probably don't need an overwhelming skincare regimen. So it's really interesting you sort of mention that, because there is, as much as we're talking about consumers wanting to take control, although it's obviously still parental responsibility if we're talking about people that young, but brands can have a responsibility or play a role in that, because as you say, they can help guide people, because consumers, of course, will know what they want, but we as an industry have a duty maybe to make sure that, I mean, if you're using some of these ingredients on your face when you're 12 years old and you haven't hit puberty yet, you may potentially causing future problems for yourself anyway, aren't you? So it's a really interesting sort of space to take a look at. And I love what you said there, Viv, about the Indu example again, only because I wonder how important it is for, in this sort of example, we're talking about age-specific people being involved in the development of products. But does that not highlight how, for companies going forward, even though the consumer may have the largest voice, it's all about, you need people from all walks of life, all backgrounds to be involved in the making of a product. There's no point making a product for a particular culture if the people developing that project don't have a strong foothold in that culture, for example. So do you think that the progression we're going to see there is going to be interesting?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, we've, like Alex said, we're getting so many questions about Gen A at the moment, moving on from Gen Z, but that is ignoring the other demographics, and brands do need to find a way to talk to, particularly bring in people who are maybe feel underserved right now by making them part of the conversation. We've moved along such a long way from the days back in the 80s when everything was behind glass counters and you had a sort of a sales assistant standing between you and the products, and you had to ask to see them and ask the prices, etc. It's so much more of a collaborative experience these days. But I do think that maybe at the older end of the spectrum, brands may be missing a trick there.
Yeah. And just to add to this point, I think we are seeing some brands doing quite well, but we maybe don't put the spotlight on them as much. But for example, Trainee London has been expanding a lot. They've been expanding into physical retail, and they have been targeting a bit more like this slightly older demographic as well. I'm saying slightly older demographic. It would be but, they've been expanding. Brands like Merit in makeup as well have been doing extremely well, receiving fundings and expanding. And they're not actively targeting younger adults as well. It's just, I think we're a bit obsessed by them at the moment because we struggle a bit more to understand them, and it's just evolving so fast, and they're also a bit more of an easier target, maybe at the moment. So, it's, there is propositions for other demographics. We might not see them buzzing around as much, I think.
I was just going to say on that Trini London point, I was in New York last week just on holiday, and I walked past the Trini London store that's in Soho there. Yeah, I didn't realize that they had one. But I walked past and it was like evening time, so I assumed the store was closed. And there was a group of maybe sort of 9 women in their kind of I'd say like 50s, just in the store having like a glass of champagne, and I think they were just being talked through the products. And it just felt like a really nice, like that collaborative effort of, yes, we've picked these ingredients, or we know what's going to be good for your skin, but like come and sort of talk to us in a much less formal way about, what you think is going to be right for you, and just bringing it all together. So yeah, I think that control is still very much something that brands feel they have to, not kowtow to, but as in they feel that they need consumers to feel that control and want to allow them to do that in that space, which I really liked.
I was going to say, I've been to New York as well, and I went to Jones Road. You can cut that out.
But it's interesting you say that, and I like that you mentioned underserved consumers potentially. I think sometimes, especially in sort of this social media world we live in, information age and everything, it seems like sometimes it's very easy to appeal and target and engage younger audiences, and it is sometimes it feels like maybe the older audiences maybe they become less appealing to sort of maybe to marketers or to how to get products. But actually, that's a huge market that isn't necessarily underserved. Of course, you've already mentioned a couple of brands there who do very well serving that market. But it to me, it highlights there's this sort of shift now towards, again, as we talk about personalization, which means so many different things, there is this shift towards kind of like life stage beauty at different points in my life. It doesn't necessarily mean my age. It just means at different points in my life, I'm going to need different types of products, and finding a brand that can almost be like a companion rather than, that kind of relationship where it is a two-way thing. And this brand understands me, it gets me, and it can help me through sort of, as I say, whatever different sort of thing I'm going through in my life stage, whether that's environmental conditions, you've changed where you live, whether it's hormones, or there's so many different things I think that brands can appeal to consumers with. And I think especially for that older audience as well, it's sometimes remembering that beauty is still fun, and it's still, it's still an appealing, alluring place to be, rather than, as I say, it's the minute I mentioned life stage beauty and then you talk about older consumers, and I'm now then thinking there's some great menopause products out there. But for example, that isn't the only thing I want to be targeted with.
Yeah. Sure. And there is that difficult choice. Do you put menopause all the way across your product packaging and your promotional materials, or do you use soft references? And there are pros and cons for both of them.
Exactly, yeah, because it's ultimately that's going to highlight to me that that's what the product's for, and if I'm looking for that type of product, that is important to me. But as I say, but on the other side, you then may have a consumer who's thinking, well, I'm of a certain age, I'm going through a certain situation, but that doesn't define me. Menopause isn't the only thing that defines me. And there's so many other examples that would be the situation. So I think the way brands speak to consumers, and as Alex, as you mentioned, with having those moments where you truly connect, whether that's in store or offline. Do you think there's a best way, or do you think there are best case examples of how to connect with consumers to create those little communities, whether that is in store or whether it is the online space? Or
I think it can completely depend on who the audience is, right? So I think. And this is something I know we talked about in previous beauty trends, where we talk about meeting the consumer where they are, right? And saying, like, if your target group is in, online a lot. And this is what we're getting with Gen Z and Gen Alpha now, that, the whole metaverse thing. Should we be on the metaverse? And it's like, well, does it make sense for you to be there? Can you put across what you need from the products or, on the metaverse, or are you just trying to raise brand awareness? If you're trying to raise brand awareness, I think Nivea is a really great example of where they've done the tower run game in Roblox, where it's just about collecting things, helping you be aware of the products, but it's also just a really fun game. They've met consumers very much where they are, where they want to be, and they're not being pushy about like, here's an educational platform on everything Nivea offers. It's like, here's a fun game and you can win some merch. And so really just making it something that really will appeal to that audience. Whereas, and I'm not saying that, and this is the thing, when we talk about things like menopause, there's really a thought that we're talking to like old fuddy-duddy people who don't go on the internet. We're talking about Gen X. We're talking about older millennials in some cases who are starting to go through menopause, and they grew up, the MySpace generation, etc. We're talking about people who still have that kind of hybrid approach, maybe aren't as trusting of everything that's purely online only. But, that ability to have those more physical touch points is going to be really important to them. But it is about ensuring that if you're really trying to appeal to a target, you understand them holistically. And I think that goes back to that idea of control and sort of what's important to them, not just within beauty, but also, where beauty sits within their sort of hierarchy of, important things as well.
Yeah, speaking as a Gen Xer, I completely bought into Jones Road. I don't know how they got me. Kudos to their SEO operatives and so on. But suddenly my Instagram feed was just flooded with WTF foundation and how to apply it and how it's going to make me look like a better me, not a different me. And I just like, yeah. So when I was in New York, I went to their store and I bought everything, really. But it's interesting what you were saying about looking at generations where they are as well, because Differin has teamed up with Twitch and they're promoting their acne products on gaming sites. And they were there online with gamers talking about their clear skin stories, but they also had an IRL presence at TwitchCon as well. And it was just a case of, gamers get acne too, possibly more if they're in little dark rooms dealing in stereotypes. But I just thought that was a really interesting way to target young acne sufferers.
The gamers are going to come for you now, Viv. You know that, right?
Probably, but I don't game, so they can't find me. Really not that demographic.
I do think it does. So the examples you mentioned there kind of brings me to maybe talking about one of our other, the Think Slow, Move Fast trend, where we talk about sort of the slow living and people, as we sort of mentioned things like intent or purpose when we buy. And I think you mentioned like the fun things there. That is there are so many different ways to appeal to consumers who are going to be mindfully shopping or searching for the best value. And what that value means to consumers obviously differs. So I think how do you see sort of that sort of appealing to the senses, appealing to emotions? How important do you think that is in sort of targeting consumers? I mean, Clotilde, you obviously were a big part of putting this trend together, obviously talking about slow living. And when we hear slow, we think, okay, people are going to be paring back, not buying things. But actually, it can be a bit different to that, right?
I think it's more putting more intentionality behind your purchases, like you said, from a value perspective, because at the end of the day, it is expensive to experiment and buy a lot of products if you're not an influencer receiving different products to try. But yeah, like you said, the industry is also fun. This is why people feel drawn to it. I think going back to what we're saying about targeting consumers, but I think it's become very serious as well on some levels, like talking about skincare and talking about science and biotech, and everything became very sciencey and very techy. And I think people have been making mistakes along the way. But, they don't feel maybe they feel a bit ashamed because they're like, oh my God, like I didn't use the product right. Like this person suggested. And I thought Elf, for example, did a very nice campaign. I think it was over Halloween, with an American comedian, and they were talking about the skincare sins and she was playing a devil, encouraging people to make mistakes in their skincare routines, and people had to confess like what kind of sins they had committed like in their skincare routines, and how like e.l.f. products down the line were, you know, there to help them redeem their sins, you know, and they were like the best, like the go-to products, you know, if you wanted to. So I thought it was a lighter tone of voice also in terms of that that approach to beauty in general. And I think it just brings back to how people want to experiment also with the category. And this is where sensoriality is such a big factor. Like you said, Vivienne, for example, with the Jones Road products, it's, you know, it's just products that are going to enhance your better self. And I think as consumers grow older as well, the way they sense and the way they experience the products is also evolving and changing too. And all the research that has been going on with the neuroscience and neurotechnology is also now kind of bridging that gap between the science and the emotional aspect of it, making, you know, people aware that there are actual like scientific connections between how you feel and how you interact with a scent, a texture, a product.
I was looking at a company's strategic announcement yesterday, and it was quite interesting that they had this real focus on not just the science behind the products, but also saying that they want to talk about product experience rather than product properties. And I think that really aligns with what you're saying, Clotilde, about the overall experience with sensoriality and the fragrance as well.
And we sometimes forget just how important that functional element of products is, right? Like you can have the best ingredient, and we kind of get obsessed with hero ingredients, I guess. But actually the functional ingredients are so important because ultimately, again, that sensorial aspect of using a beauty product, if you're thinking of sort of a cream or a body lotion or anything, if you put that cream on and it feels great, then it's just a small cue, but it automatically makes you feel much more positive about whatever you're doing here. And then obviously there's going to be great formulation there that will work for you. But I find it fascinating what you mentioned there. And I think that's what I think this slow living concept where you're being mindful and really thinking about the purpose behind everything you buy. I think that's a fascinating angle for brands to look at the essence of how does this product feel when I apply it? Because ultimately most formulations are probably going to work. And if a product works for me, I'll probably buy from that brand again. That's good. However, if that product works, but also makes me feel good, it gives me some sort of intrinsic value that may be difficult to explain, so difficult to make claims on. But if it does make me feel better, my repeat purchase rate is probably much more likely because that product is making me feel good as well as actually working for me. So I think it's fascinating what you mentioned about the senses. I want to bring you in here, Alex, because you are a sensorial queen. I know this because I need to clarify that. But on a podcast, this maybe doesn't work if you're listening, but I am looking in your room right now, and I know you do have what I believe is a croissant candle behind you. And again, it's that sense of like just that fun sort of that's what I mean, like senses, like the scent in particular I love because you smell something and it can immediately cast you back to a time in your life, or it can make you think of something else. So that's why I called you a sensorial queen, and that's why I'm bringing you in on this moment now, just to talk about your croissant candle.
The croissant candle, it smells like pure butter, and I love it so much. My housemate says that my room smells like a bakery, and I've recently also received as a gift a coffee smelling candle, so now it's just going to smell like a cafe, and I'm really down for that. I think it's going to be great. But when you guys were talking about those brands and those products that you'll buy again and again because of the sensorial experience, I was literally thinking of so many products that I do that with, and I think all of us in this industry, we love trying new brands. We love trying new products. It's rare that we'll, use the same products twice. Sometimes, once we've reached the end of life, we're already trying the next thing. But there's a few products and brands that I buy over and over again because of that sensorial experience. So the Emma Hardy skincare balm, because I love the feeling of like that. It smells amazing, but also just the feeling of that kind of the softness on my skin after I use it. And then there was a product a while ago by by higher education. It was their cucumber, like light moisturizer. And it was so cooling on the skin and it smelled just like cucumber. And I was like, this is so refreshing. So again, like these types of products where you can make that claim around a feeling or like a sense is really great. So is it that it gives you the feeling of, you know, a just washed face? Does it give you the sensation of, like that cocooning feeling? All of those words that I think beauty is always really, really good at using. But, you know, those beautiful descriptions of how it makes you feel, I think is so important. And I think that really appeals to me and adds to that slow living idea of like, I'm just feeling this moment right now when I put that product on. The other brand that I was thinking does or feeds into this quite well is 4am Skin, which talks about being really anti-wellness. So that idea of like, you don't have to completely change your approach to living if you want to like go out and experience things and, you know, stay out till 2am because, you know, that's the beauty of life, right? You want to experience all. But this brand isn't going to tell you to stay at home and, you know, slather your face with SPF and never leave the house. It's saying like, we're there to help you the next day, maybe when you're a little bit hungover or maybe when you're not feeling so great, and just ease you back into the day with, you know, under eye gels or things like ingredients that are just going to sort of make your skin feel a lot better. And again, it's that idea of sensoriality, but also let's ease you back in. Like you don't have, like, if you are going to go hard. But, you know, once you're back after that, let's take a moment to chill and let's just enjoy that moment as well.
I feel like that's great advice as we approach the Christmas season now, as the holiday season. If you're going to go hard, go hard.
I was just going to say, have you got it ready for Saturday morning after our Christmas party?
I've got some face masks in the fridge ready for Saturday morning. That's where I keep all of my face masks, and it's beautiful to put on a really cold one the next day. God, I really am a sensorial queen. I never realised this about myself.
But I think it's so important because, as you mentioned there, like the way beauty products can make us feel maybe becomes a bit underestimated. Sometimes we do step into a dark world of maybe claim substantiation over what you can claim around products. And I think that's probably what the wellness industry has battled with, I think probably for years now. But I do think with the developments, as Clotilde mentioned, with the developments in sort of neuroscience, and there's so much research now around sort of sleep and about stress and, you know, how products can, using beauty products can and have been proven that, you know, it can make you feel happy, or at least give you that sort of hormone boost that suggests you're happier. But I think that kind of thing is really important. And again, that is going to help with when you are mindfully shopping or shopping for purpose or seeking value. It really is an important aspect of that purchase decision.
I think just to add a point here, I think we're rethinking also innovation from brands as well. Like, brands have been relaunching or extending ranges of hero products or reformulating. And I think we only see when people are really loyal to a product once a brand starts reformulating, for example, and when people complain about the smell or the texture that's not the same. So people are very, very attached to this sensorial element. And once a brand changes it, it can be very difficult for the consumers, and the potential backlash also that can go into it. So that's also something to be very mindful for brands as we see them leaning a bit more towards those relaunches or reformulations rather than new like innovative products on the market.
And that's a perfect segue for me to jump in here, actually, and move us on to our next topic, because I'm very much aware of time, and I could just talk to you guys all day, to be honest. But that talk about reformulation makes me think of when we're thinking about sort of sustainable alternatives and trying to reformulate products, obviously, to deal with that growing sustainability demand that is just, as I say, is this baseline expectation for consumers now. So as we shift towards that, are you seeing anything particularly in this, in sort of the sustainability space that is particularly disruptive? Because obviously it's something we've been talking about for years, but we are reaching that breaking point of brands just need to be doing it. In essence, they don't really need to be talking about it that much. They have to be doing it, right? Because consumers say they want sustainability. Whether they actually do those actions is debatable. As we know, that say-do gap does exist. But do you think there is this genuine movement now towards making sustainable not just from a sustainability point of view, but from an actual efficacy point of view now as well?
That's an interesting question. So I think sustainability is something that I have been quite passionate about in terms of how we get this done from an industry point of view. Because previous to my Mintel life, I used to work in revenue management, which was all about, how do we price products based on cost of goods, to ensure that we maximize profit, etc. And that's the equation that every single brand, every single manufacturer is battling with on a daily basis. And yeah, they want to make profits. We 100% understand that. But Andrew, you make this point a lot, and I completely agree with it, that consumers, sustainability is not a reason to buy a product and pay more for a product. But if you don't offer sustainability, it is a reason not to buy you, right? It's that reason to step away and say, well, there are so many other options now that give me some kind of sustainability. Why would I choose the one that doesn't? But what brands are now sort of having to come to terms with is the fact that there are enough other competing brands out there that if they don't take that up, they are going to damage their own brand. And so they're never going to achieve that maximum profitability because they're never going to reach the volumes that they need. And I think that volume question is where a lot of brands are getting stuck. So how do we create enough demand that the cost of sustainable goods comes down and doesn't sort of take over and make a sustainable option more expensive? And we've seen a couple of different suppliers investing in more sustainable manufacturing. So Evonik, for example, recently they are building their first new plant that is dealing specifically with bio-based emollients. And so they will have huge manufacturing capability for that, which means it's not going to be quite as expensive for their customers. But you've also got big companies like L'Oreal investing in startups that can sort of create these bio-based products at scale because they are rebuilding them at a cellular level and then transferring them into an environment where they can be scaled up and therefore, again, reducing that cost that they're seeing. So I think this is where we're at that point where we are turning the tide, getting the name of the trend in there. Thank you. But I think we're hitting that point where big brands are really starting to improve that scalability because that cost of goods is where we're starting to see sustainability hitting.
I think we need that in the refills area because, we're seeing loads more refillable options come to the market all across all the categories, but there's very little differentiation between the price of a full-size virgin pack and the price of the refill. And I think that's still hampering usage because consumers can feel good that they're doing the right thing in terms of reducing waste. But if it's not actually saving them money and they see that they're getting less for buying the refill, then that's still going to put a brake on usage, I think. So there's still, with packaging, I think there's still work to be done with that.
I think fragrances have been quite ahead when it came to positioning refills as a value for money driver for the consumers. I remember when Mugler, they were offering their refills like very early on, I would say. Mm-hmm. They were always kind of saying, oh, if you buy this, you'll get 20% off. So they were always positioning it with a discount and kind of proposing that value model also that was associating with getting the refill. And I feel like the fragrance industry has been better than other industries as to kind of explaining the value proposition also of getting a refill product and making it also more easy to use for the consumer as well.
I was just going to say, when it comes to refills, I think the reason maybe fragrance does so much better is because we're talking about hundreds of pounds for a really nice fragrance, right? And when you say something like 20% off, that's huge. we're talking again about a decent sum of money off there. When you talk about things like skincare, where people are paying sort of £20 maybe, and they get a refill for £16, you think, is it really worth it? So I think there also needs to be a discussion, or there needs to be some kind of investigation around what is the depth of discount that is going to really drive that usage. And again, we get into kind of the economics of sustainability here. So what is the maximum discount that you can drive that drives up that volume, that really makes refills a worthwhile proposition?
Yeah, I think all I was going to say, and you've kind of reiterated it even more, but I'm not sure if this is damning or not, but cost is so important. It's all well and good thinking we want to do the best thing for the planet, but one of the big pillars of sustainability is also financial stage. So we still do. Cost is so important. And I always recall speaking to a contract manufacturer not so long ago, and speaking to them about sustainability trends, and them sort of saying, well, we've always offered a sustainable solution. And we also have like two solutions. One is the normal, and then one is the much more sustainable solution. And we have to charge a little bit more for it. And we've always offered that to brands, but they just always take the other one because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So it's how do you make that? I mean, for consumers, but also again, right through the supply chain, how do you make it the most convenient way to be sustainable? Because that's ultimately, I think, that if you're truly going to change consumer behavior and you're going to change behaviors throughout, it's because we're flawed individuals, right? We all take shortcuts. So how do you make it convenient to be sustainable? Do you give an option? Do you give a choice? I always think of the single-use plastic bags, when it's not a case of you get rewarded for bringing in your bag for life. Actually, if you don't have it and you get punished, you have to buy another bag. And that genuinely changed behaviors. And I'm fascinated by, that's obviously not the solution for everything, but I'm fascinated, is there a way that we can reframe what we do with sustainability and beauty that would sort of encourage genuine consumer behavior change?
It's interesting if we take ourselves as our own guinea pigs, because we're all good at sort of using our data and extrapolating it and using our consumer insights, etc., and saying, well, this is what people think and this is what people do. And then you actually sort of catch yourself on when you're going to the store yourself and seeing what you're doing. For me, a case in point was last year buying sun protection and seeing a Garnier product, and it was price A in ordinary packaging, and then it was price B, a little bit higher, in the sustainable packaging. And I stood there for bloody ages working out which one, and it was only for the sake of about £2. And in the end, I just thought, okay, put your money where your mouth is, pay a bit more and get the sustainable option. And I did feel I felt like I should be running through the store holding it above my head saying, look at me, I'm sustainable. But there wasn't that clear explanation on shelf. And I think if I hadn't been in the industry and been reading about it and knowing what I was basing my decision on, maybe it wouldn't have been quite, still a struggle, but less of a struggle.
Yeah. To your point, Vivienne, I think that's really what's missing at the moment is a wider industry commitment, or just a wider industry understanding, but something coming from the industry itself. I think it was from the Global Sustainability Outlook. I think for brands at the moment, one of the ways for them to claim, their sustainable achievements is to put a certification stamp on everything, but it's not a purchase driver for a consumer. And I think it was quite interesting to see that actually consumers were more inclined to demand like a simple rating scale over a certification claim, just because it's simpler also to understand. And it just feels like when we compare to what's going on into the food industry, it's an industry-wide initiative as well. And at the moment, everyone is kind of working in their own corners to claim whatever they can claim, and good for them if they're B Corp or EcoCert and everything. But I don't think it's either a driver or just something consumer understand at the moment. And we're just lacking something simple and visual and collective within that space at the moment.
I was just going to say because you have, when you were talking about Garnier, they do have their sustainability scale ratings, but again, that's only for them, right? It's not an industry-wide thing. But over the last few years, I've definitely seen more, launches of these kind of consortiums and brand partnerships, these companies all working together. But to be honest, I'm yet to see any kind of huge news about what's coming out of those consortiums and what they're coming back with and what they're creating together. I'm mostly just seeing, yes, we're working together because that's what consumers want. They want us to all work together and to create something unified. And I'm just not seeing that output yet in the same way.
Yeah, Clotilde, you and I were in a client meeting last week, weren't we, where we were talking about the eco ratings on packaging, PFR, and I think L'Oreal as well are doing it. They're part of that, just that sort of consortium that you're talking about, Alex. But I mean, there's been talk about having harmonized Euro sort of labeling across the industry. And as you say, I think it's been 2 years since they announced that they were discussing it, but we haven't really seen anything concrete yet.
And the EU is always there to regulate about ingredients and making sure that brands comply with their regulation. There's brands in the US who even make claims that they comply with EU regulations because that's actually like a stamp of quality for them, for the consumers over there. But when it comes to then making it clear and easy for the end consumer, there's not much happening, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, there's that. There's talk about eco passports, isn't there? It's in fabric care right now, and you can see some really interesting ways that clothing brands are doing that. Yeah. But I had a chat with the CTPA about it a while back, and they don't think it's going to affect the beauty industry for at least a couple of years yet, because the EU's got to get the fabric and the fashion element right first. But that's going to shake things up, and it's going to cost companies an awful lot to comply as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a whole host of work to be done, but it's also exciting to see that work is being done. Those foundations are being laid, and I think that's the joy of the beauty industry a lot of the time as well. Is that even though we're constantly striving and we're not scared to make mistakes because we'll learn from them and then we come up with something else. So I know that isn't always what you're aiming to do, but I do think this is an industry that is forward thinking and is very interesting. And I kind of feel like we could probably have a sustainability podcast all on its own without sort of delving too much into this. Unfortunately, we probably have hit our time though, which is a real shame because I do love speaking with you all anyway. But I mean, we've kind of gone through quite a lot there, from sort of talking about demographics and taking control and how we speak to consumers, build communities, sensorial aspects, how we feel about products, right down to obviously that actual sustainability aspect as well. I feel like we've covered quite a lot today. So I really do want to thank Alex, Clotilde and Viv, all three of you today for joining me. So thank you for your insights. And I'm sure I will tap you up for more in the future as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
It's been great. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Yes.
It has been great. And also thank you if you're listening. The conversation doesn't end here, though. You can head over to Mintel's LinkedIn and Instagram and let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the beauty and personal care trends that you may have read about. You can read more about them on Mintel's platform as well. Or indeed, just anything you've heard in this conversation. If there's anything you want to comment on, please be kind. Or any questions that you want answered, then please do let us know. And if you do want more, or you want to know more about Mintel, please visit mintel.com, sign up to become a free member of the free Mintel Spotlight community, and make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to this very podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. But all that's left for me to say now is once again, thank you to Alex, Clotilde and Viv for joining me today for a very insightful conversation. Goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time for a new episode of The Little Conversation.